For nearly 3 decades, I've been a career prosecutor. I've served during both Republican and Democratic administrations, and I've been guided by those principles in every role I've held. I continued to honor those principles when I was appointed to serve as special counsel in November of 2022. The decision to bring charges against President Trump was mine, but the basis for those charges rests entirely with President Trump and his actions, as alleged in the indictments returned by grand juries in 2 different districts. Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 election and to prevent the lawful transfer of power. Our investigation also developed powerful evidence that showed that President Trump willfully retained highly classified documents after he left office in January of 2021, storing them at his social club, including in a ballroom and a bathroom. He then repeatedly tried to obstruct justice to conceal his continued retention of those documents. I remain grateful for the counsel, judgment, and advice of my team as I executed my responsibilities. I am both saddened and angered that President Trump has sought revenge against career prosecutors, FBI agents, and support staff simply for doing their jobs and for having worked on those cases. These dedicated public servants are the best of us, and they have been wrongly vilified and improperly dismissed from their jobs. I made my decisions in the investigation without regard to President Trump's political association, activities, beliefs, or candidacy in the 2024 presidential election. We took our actions based on the facts and the law, the very lessons I learned early in my career as a prosecutor. We followed Justice Department policies and observed legal requirements. The timing and speed of our work reflects the strength of the evidence and our confidence that we would have secured convictions at trial. If asked whether to prosecute a former president based on the same facts today, I would do so regardless of whether that president was a Republican or a Democrat. Recent narratives about my team's work are false and misleading, including stories about our collection of toll records. Toll records were sought for historical telephone routing information, collected after calls had taken place, identifying the incoming and outgoing call numbers, the time of the calls and their duration. Toll records do not include the content of calls. Those records were lawfully subpoenaed and were relevant to complete a comprehensive investigation. January 6th was an attack on the structure of our democracy in which over 140 heroic law enforcement officers were assaulted. Over 160 individuals later pled guilty to assaulting police that day. Exploiting that violence, President Trump and his associates tried to call members of Congress in furtherance of their criminal scheme, urging them to further delay certification of the 2020 election. I did not choose those members. President Trump did. I hope that my testimony today serves to correct these mischaracterizations about my work, and to that end, I welcome your questions.
Okay, the Viceroy joins us. I remember the Viceroy came to prominence on that raid, as you remember, back several years ago, Mike Davis. This goes on and on and on. I think there's a 240-page deposition. We're going to make sure everybody can read that over the weekend because I think people need to read that. But this guy gets an answer question. This is as scary as it gets. Sundance over at Conservative Treehouse, and Grayson Moe, if you can blow that out, I've got it up on Getter, I think lays out the case that this is really, you're really seeing lawfare at work here, sir.
Yeah, this Jack Smith's testimony proves that Joe Biden and Merrick Garland picked the right prosecutor to try to take out President Trump. This guy is a rabid left-wing ideologue. This is the same Jack Smith who brought bogus charges against former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell got him convicted of bogus charges, and those charges were overturned several years later by the Supreme Court 8-0. It would have been 9-0, but Justice Scalia passed away, but the damage was done. Jack Smith took out former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell as a potential presidential or vice presidential candidate. They did the same thing here with President Trump. When they heard that President Trump was thinking about running for election again in 2024, that's where they sent in Jack Smith. They brought him back for that from The Hague, where he was banished after getting overturned 8-0. Let me just pause. I clerked on the Supreme Court. It is very hard to get reversed by the Supreme Court on a criminal case. It is almost impossible for that to happen unanimously, but Jack Smith found the way. He should have been done. He should have stayed in The Hague, and his legal career should have been over, but he was the perfect Scud missile for Joe Biden.
But hang on. But this is why they sent him. That's part of it. But they sent him to The Hague because they had to go after these guys, and they wanted a guy that wouldn't follow any rules. His reign of terror at The Hague is legendary. They sent him over there because he has no morals, no ethics, right? I mean, that's why he went there. And according to them, right, the globalists, he did a good job for him because he said, he did all the stuff at The Hague that is now getting reversed over there, sir.
Yeah. I mean, this guy is a partisan Scud missile that Democrats launch at Republican presidential contenders to try to take them out. And they were almost successful with President Trump. Again, we've been saying this on your show for 3.5 years. It is not espionage for a president to have his presidential records. That is allowed by the Presidential Records Act. Any document created or received by the president or his staff is a presidential record, and it does not matter whether it's classified or not. There are many presidential records, a great many that are classified, and this is why former presidents have security clearances and SCIFs.
Yeah.
And they have staff that has security clearances, and they have 24/7, 365 Secret Service protection. Jack Smith says that these documents were in a ballroom. They were locked. They were locked in Mar-a-Lago with 24/7, 365 Secret Service protection, and President Trump is allowed to have these records.
So Mike Davis, Sundance over at Conservative Treehouse kind of breaks this down, and I think tries to alert people that you've got to get into this deposition and read it or watch it, because we're in a new zone of legal lawfare terror by watching this guy. So walk me through, what are the issues legally that's got your backup and many people in many of the legal profession on the MAGA side, and also many independents. And then what in the hell are we going to do about it, sir?
So Jack Smith's testimony confirms what we have discussed on your show for over 3.5 years, which is this: it is not a crime for a former president to have his presidential records. That's allowed by the Presidential Records Act. That's why Congress gives former presidents staff security clearances, 24/7, 365 Secret Service protection, secure facilities to have these records. Along those lines, it was Jack Smith, remember, when he did this unlawful raid on the office of former president for presidential records he's allowed to have under the Presidential Records Act. It was Jack Smith and his guys who arranged those classified records in President Trump's office as if President Trump had them scattered all over the floor, which he did not. And then they put out a photo of that to try to taint the case, to try to change public opinion on this raid. So that's number one. Number two, Jack Smith's testimony confirms what we've discussed on the challenging presidential elections. It is not a crime to challenge a presidential election in America, right? It is specifically allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887 and the First Amendment, and that's why Democrats didn't go to prison for objecting to Republican presidential wins in 1968, 2000, 2004, and 2016. Again, it's only a crime to object to a presidential election in a third world Marxist hellhole like Somalia, for example. And we have Jack Smith bringing Somalian justice to the United States with these prosecutions of President Trump. And Jack Smith's testimony was very alarming on this point. Jack Smith said that it was somehow fraud for President Trump to challenge the presidential election in 2020 because he had advisors telling him it wasn't stolen. I've spoken with President Trump many, many times over the last 4 years about the 2020 presidential election, and he is firmly convinced that 2020 was stolen because guess what? It was stolen. Democrats illegally used COVID to change state election laws illegally in violation of the elections clause and illegally mass mailed ballots out to old lists, including college students who have moved 10 times. They got rid of election observers because of COVID. They said election observers couldn't observe the process, or they couldn't get close enough to observe the process. And then they got rid of signature verification because somehow COVID changes your signature. And then we have these magical vote spikes at 2 a.m. in the key counties in these key swing states. And Joe Biden has this remarkable come from behind victory at 3 o'clock in the morning. Of course, 2020 was stolen. And of course, they wanted to prosecute President Trump for this because they couldn't have him get back in office and prove that 2020 was stolen. And here's the other thing about January 6th, and we've talked about this a lot. January 6th was a lawful protest permitted by the National Park Service that devolved into a riot. And there were three categories of people who were there on January 6th. There were people who were there who were outside and they were peaceful. And it doesn't matter whether you think they're crazy. They have an absolute First Amendment right to be there. There were people who trespassed. Some would say the police let them in, but even if they trespass, you charge them with trespass. And then there were people who were violent, and then you treat them, you charge them with violence. But to lump everyone together to say that it was an insurrection, it was an attack on democracy, and President Trump was responsible for it was complete nonsense. And Jack Smith knows this, and he knows this because of this. If President Trump was responsible for the January 6th riots, Jack Smith, then why the hell didn't you charge President Trump with inciting the January 6th riot? And the answer is because you know there was zero evidence that President Trump did this. Here's what needs to happen, Steve. There needs to be accountability for what Jack Smith did, and that includes Jack Smith going on criminal trial and going to prison. And it's for conspiracy against rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241. Jack Smith is very familiar with this charge. It's one of the 4 charges he brought against President Trump in D.C. for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election. So if Jack Smith is going to contort federal laws and make up fake crimes to go after President Trump like he did Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, Jack Smith needs to be prosecuted and put in prison ASAP.
Mike, help me out here. This is a high priority for the president, obviously. It's a super high priority for the MAGA movement. It's a super high priority for War Room. This is why we were banned. First it was Fauci, then it was the election, why we're banned on all the platforms throughout the world. It's not that I want to get back. I could care less. The show's huge without them. But this is a high priority for many people involved in this. What do you recommend? What do we have to do to actually get action on this? I think that now I see in South Florida, you're starting to see the Brennan thing, but this to the 2020 election, because as President Trump said when he came out to Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA right after the election in December of 2024, and Charlie introduced him, the president said, "Hey, look, this is the reason I won." And it's the first time I had talked to him about it, but it's the first time he ever came out and said publicly, "I ran because I knew 2020 was stolen, and if I was going to let that happen, just happen, you're not going to have a country." So now we know this. We're in charge. What is the Viceroy's recommendation? What in the hell has to happen? Because I can tell you, people are at wits' end about these things, right? They particularly on this one, that something has to happen or we don't have a country. We can do all kind of stuff where President Trump's here, but if you don't get to the heart of this, you're not going to have a country, sir.
2026 is the year of accountability, and accountability has to come, and it will come. You saw there is a new grand jury that is starting this month, January 2026, down in Fort Pierce, Florida. Jason Redding Quinones, my friend, who is the Miami U.S. Attorney, Southern District of Florida, where they did the Mar-a-Lago raid against President Trump. That's the hook. That makes the Fort Pierce division the appropriate venue to bring this, and there has to be accountability. And I would say this, and I know there will be accountability because I want to make damn sure it happens. My New Year's resolution, Steve, is to stop being so shy. I'm gonna get out there and I'm gonna stop biting my tongue. I'm gonna stop. I'm joking, obviously, but look, justice is coming in 2026. It is definitely coming. You have seen the news reports that subpoenas have gone out very broadly to these lawfare Democrats.
But do we? Okay,
If
I got you. Got this guy. Hey, you got this guy in South Florida. I hear he's a rock star. He's already started. I hear that Brennan said they got a letter, so we know things are going. But the scale of this, we only have 14 U.S. attorneys of President Trump's. I think 92. The blue slip thing's killing us. The filibuster's killing us. We don't have enough Mike Davises. We need 10 new special prosecutors, right? And how we get them through, we got to figure out. Maybe take guys already in the government. It's the scale of this thing is so big. It just can't. We can't put everything on one great U.S. attorney down in Florida with one judge because it's bigger than that. So how do we hyperscale as the tech bros, as the AI tech bros would tell us? How do we hyperscale this, sir?
What I would recommend happens is we have these U.S. attorneys who are Senate confirmed around the country, and you find the most bold and fearless of these U.S. attorneys, and you create a SWAT team of U.S. attorneys who are going to go after these high priority issues, whether it's Somalian fraud, whether it's lawfare, whether it's attacks against our ICE agents. We need the A team. And I think that we have enough U.S. attorneys confirmed in key places like Jason Redding Quinones in the Southern District of Florida. We have, I would say there's at least a dozen, like you said, there's at least a dozen U.S. attorneys around the country who can be part of this A team and help Pam Bondi and help Todd Blanche and help Kash Patel bring justice all over America for all these various issues, whether it's the lawfare, whether it's the invasion, whether it's the fraud.
Okay. Let me get this before I lose you, because I know we don't want everybody to go to Article 3. So, okay, so we got that. We're going to be on that. I know you revere Grassley, and many of us do. I mean, what I revere most about him, he ain't a lawyer, right? He's just an old, tough farmer from Iowa. But this issue of blue slips, what are we going to do about this? You got the filibuster, you got these kind of customs and traditions that kind of have us jammed up right now. What's the Viceroy's recommendation?
It sounds like you got the same phone call I got, Steve, but I would say this on blue slips. So look, on the filibuster,
I got an earful. Hey, and I got an earful, brother. I got an earful.
I hear you. Maybe I did too. So I would say this on the filibuster. There is no question that Senate Republicans should get rid of the filibuster, the 60-vote threshold for legislation. Democrats got rid of the filibuster for judges under Obama and stacked the D.C. Circuit and the D.C. District Court with left-wing radicals. Democrats will do the same thing again. They don't have Manchin and Sinema in the Senate to stop them. And the next time the Democrats control the White House, the House, and the Senate, they are going to nuke the legislative filibuster. They're going to make it much more easy to steal elections. They're going to add D.C., Puerto Rico, maybe the Virgin Islands as states with 2 new Democrat senators in each place. They are going to destroy our country. They'll pack the Supreme Court. It is game over, America. Senate Republicans need to get their heads out of their asses and get rid of the filibuster for legislation so we can get our legislation done right now, like the SAVE Act, to make sure that illegal aliens are not continuing to vote and steal in our elections. There's a reason that Mandani is the mayor of New York City. It's because foreign-born voters put in an Islamist to run our nation's largest city, just like the Islamists did the same thing in Europe with London. We have to pass key reforms now over the next year, or we're going to lose our country. And number two, on the blue slip, look, I hate the blue slip. I think it's stupid. We need to get rid of it. I tried to get rid of it when I worked for the Senate 8 years ago. I broke every piece of China in the Senate, including getting rid of the blue slip for circuit judges. The one sacred piece of China that is too high to break is blue slips for U.S. attorneys, district judges, and U.S. Marshals. It's not a Grassley problem. This is a Senate problem. If Grassley ignores the blue slips and tries to hold votes on these nominees without blue slips, they are going to fail in their committee votes. They won't even make it to the floor.
Mike, where do people go to Article 3? Now more than ever, we need Article 3, the Viceroy. This is the year of accountability. I'm telling you, this is going to be in the trenches a grind, folks. This is going to be as nasty as you get. Where are they go, sir?
Very fast. Get a letter with 50 Republicans in the Senate, along with every Senate Judiciary Republican, saying we will vote for nominees without blue slips, and then Grassley can move forward. Short of that, these nominees will fail. These Republican senators will not give up their power, just like Senate Democrats will not give up their power. So it's article3project.org, article3project.org. Follow us on social media. Donate, but only what you can afford. The War Room Posse superpower is action, action, action. And thank you, Steve, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.